Vayigash, right, is a strong word. It means that it doesn't mean that he just met him, right? Which is the simple meaning. It would be that they just come. I want to meet you, so I come to meet you. But here it's saying that he aggressively approached him, like you would if you're about to get into a fight, right? Someone comes right into your face. That's what happened here. Yehuda comes up to Yosef because Yosef has now said, "Well, I'll give you food. Just give me your brother." And then he takes the brother, the little brother, right? And now they're in trouble, right? So as they'll say. So Yehuda, who we know later on in history, he represents kingship. He's the army. He's the leader. He rushes forward to defend his family, right? And he says V'yomer, and he says the following: Bi Adoni, Yedaber na avdecha davar be'oznei Adoni v'al yachar apcha be'avdecha ki kamocha kafaro. So he says, speak please, let me, your servant, please speak to you. Don't be angry with us because you are like Pharaoh. To me, you are like Pharaoh. So on a simple level, he's saying, right, look, we have to have a very serious conversation. Don't misunderstand that and think that I'm being disrespectful. I'm not being disrespectful because to me, it's talking to you is like talking to Pharaoh. In other words, it's like I talk to, it's sort of like, you have certain people who represent another person. So Yosef's represented Pharaoh. So when I speak to Yosef, I'm speaking to Pharaoh. It's the same thing. So I have to therefore treat Yosef with the same degree of respect and fear that I would of Pharaoh. If Pharaoh can kill people, then Yosef could have people killed if he couldn't do it himself, right? So here Yehuda is beginning this aggressive conversation with sort of a trying to calm it down a little, right? But he's still being aggressive, right? That's one meaning. Then there's another meaning that Rashi says is that the same idea, but then he says ki chamocha kafaro, because you are like Pharaoh, and just like Pharaoh's a human being that I can kill, I can do it to you too. You're not God. Do you think Pharaoh thinks he's God? You think you're like Pharaoh, and therefore you're also like God? So I'm telling you, I can kill you just as easily as I can kill Pharaoh, and I can kill Pharaoh as easily as any other person. So don't think you can get away with this. Okay, so there's two conflicting translations of what this statement means. In both cases, he's clearly being aggressive. He's also clearly being placative. Both things. But according to the second opinion, he is like drawing a line in the sand, and that's it. You think you're going to start with me? To me, you're just like Pharaoh. It doesn't make a difference to me. Hello. Hello. Come on in. Oh, a couple minutes. We're just starting. We can't go too far without you, right?
No. Going to wait for us?
All right. So he begins by saying, right, that that's what, to me, you're like Pharaoh. So on the one hand, right, it depends which opinion you follow. He's placating him, and on the second side, he's challenging him. In either case, Yehuda is not going to allow, to the best of his ability, this fellow, who he doesn't know who he is yet, to take their youngest brother. You understand that Rachel, who was their father's most beloved wife, right, only had two sons, Yosef and Benjamin. Yosef, right, supposedly has been killed or is gone, and Benjamin is the only one left. Right, so now that the Paro's man takes Benjamin, they realize how much trouble they're in, because now both of the sons of Rachel are gone. Right, so that's why Yehuda stands up and really fights for this. And then he says, Adoni shalas avadav lemor d'yesh lechem av or ach. And then he says, and you go and you ask us, do you have a brother or a father or a brother? And we say, yeah, our father's an old man. We have a young brother, right, who's still at home. That's what they're asking. Like, oh, there's 10 of you here, so is there anybody else? So, of course, it's Yosef asking. They don't know it's Yosef. Yosef knows the answer. Right, let me just get the door. There's, he says that there's more.
What was he? How old was Yosef when he was sold, and how old was he when he became? What is the age?
I'm sure it tells us. I don't know offhand, but he was an adult in both cases. that we can see.
It's funny that the brothers didn't recognize him. I suppose they were made not
Well,
to
because he was like,
recognize him.
yeah, that's true. He also went from being an adolescent who was sort of like a slave to a full-grown man with, right, who also didn't look like them anymore. He shaved while they didn't. And he looked like an Egyptian. He dressed like an Egyptian. He spoke Egyptian. So he did everything he could to cover it up. So they say then, right? You want to ask me if we have a father or a brother left behind? So I'm telling you, yeah, we have an elderly father and a young child left behind, and then you go and you take the young child away from us, right? You're torturing our father. We can't let you do this. Just like and therefore that's like saying, just like I can kill Pharaoh, I can kill you. That's basically how he sees it. Then he goes through the whole story here on this page, repeating pretty much everything that went on about how he says, okay, I'll sell you food, and then they find the cup in the bag, and then he says again, I'll sell you food, and they see that Binyamin has been right. They take Binyamin, right? Like it's a big setup, right? So that's what Yehuda says. So at this point now, you can imagine what Joseph's feelings have to be, how Yosef feels, because here he is. The brother who was, firstly, he was taken away from his family, by his brothers. And what happens now? Binyamin gets taken away from his family by his brothers, and the brothers are ready to go to war over it. And here's Yosef, who the brothers wanted to get rid of him. So he's not feeling so good about this. He feels like, my brothers, they don't care for me. Right? On the other hand, there are those commentaries who say that this whole thing was a test. That if they were prepared to get rid of Yosef without any feelings of the fact that he was family, let's see if they've learned their lesson. So when he takes Binyamin, if they would do nothing about it, then he'd say they didn't learn their lesson. They're doing the same thing. On the other hand, if they do something about it, we can see that they've repented for what they did to me. And they're better people now, and they would never allow this to happen again. And that's what we see happens. Right? They stand up to Yosef because he took away Binyamin. Right? So at this point, Yosef is literally unable to control himself, and he has to tell them who he is. Right? At this point, because he sees that they've changed, his feelings go from being negative and distrusting to love, because they're his brothers. He goes back to realize that his brothers did something wrong, but they paid the price. Now we can move on. And so therefore he is going to reveal himself here as to who he really is. And this really is one, how I find is that, especially when you hear the Torah reader read this, it's one of the most really emotional sections in the Torah, right? How he finally says he can't restrain himself, and he tells everybody who's not necessary to leave the room, and then he tells his brothers who he is. Right, it's a very high-pitched emotional confrontation that is extremely moving. Right, and it says Joseph says to his brothers, right? He says Joseph says to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" So this is also an odd thing, because he just asked him, "Do you have a father or a brother?" And he says, "I have an older brother." So then he goes, I have an old father. Right? So now he goes and says, I am Yosef. Is my father still alive? Like, did he die in the last 5 minutes? Like, why would he ask that question? So some commentaries say that this is a rhetorical question, which is, I am Yosef, and you sold me to be a slave, and it didn't kill my father. So why are you telling me that if I take Binyamin away from you, it'll kill my father? Is my father still alive? My father didn't die, did he? Right? So that's one way of understanding it. He's being sarcastic. He's saying to them, you guys think that what you're doing is the right thing? You're wrong. You think it's right that you sold me? Right? Don't go telling me that I can't take your other brother because your father will die. He didn't die when he took me. You took me. Right? So that's what it seems to be saying. Now this whole idea it says in the Gemara, is humiliating. It might or might not have meant to be that way, but it says, for instance, that when a person dies, all of our sins that we've done pass before our eyes. It's sort of like whenever we do something wrong, we look around. Is anybody watching? Nobody's watching, so I'll do it.
Yeah,
so, right. So what happens is Hashem videotapes you, so to speak, and then at this point, and after you die, He plays it back. So you now have a room with two people watching a movie, you and God, and He's playing a film of everything wrong you've done in your life. So it's very humiliating, right? So it makes that similar to what's going on here. And that here Yosef, right, reveals himself. It's such an enormous effect in so many ways. The brothers are going through a dozen different emotions, right? They're humiliated, they're embarrassed because of what they did to him. They're afraid that now that Yosef is the number 2 man in charge and we sold him off and we're going to kill him, that he'll kill us, because he can kill us now and get away with it. No one's going to stop him from killing strangers, right? So it's a very, very tense situation here. And Yosef, as we see as it goes on, tries to minimize the anxiety of his brothers, but at first he wants them to really feel what they've done, and that's why it says it this way. So then he talks about how he's lived there in Egypt all this time, and what's it been like there for him, and what has he done, right, since he's been living there, and how he's become like the number 2 man in the whole country, right? And then it says now he wants to meet his brother Binyamin. So his brother Binyamin, who was like who he never had the opportunity to really know, now comes out, and it says that here, if we look on 255, it says that he fell upon his brother Binyamin's neck and wept, and Binyamin wept upon his neck. He then kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Afterwards his brothers conversed with him. So here you find that Binyamin, who is his only full brother, right, of all of them, right, he weeps. So the Gemara asks a question: what were they crying about? We can understand a person that has great joy, it makes you cry. But what were they crying about? So it says that Yosef was crying because he saw that in the area of Israel that would belong to Binyamin would be the temple, and the temple would be destroyed. And Binyamin is crying because he saw prophetically that the area where the temple was, right, was the section of Yosef, like around a certain area there by Yerushalayim, and that also, right, that we were going to lose the temple, and therefore we lose that land, so that made him sad as well. So the two of them were feeling a loss. So it says that they hugged each other and they cried over the loss in each other's portion. Now, of course, they didn't have the portion yet. The temple had never been built, so of course it couldn't be unbuilt, it couldn't be destroyed. But nevertheless, they had this concept in their head. Now, it's an odd thing, right? And here it is. This is what they're doing. Why don't you just say that, what happens? Yosef and Binyamin don't see each other after all these years. They finally see each other, and they cry on each other's shoulders. Do I need to have an explanation for that? What do you think they're crying about? They haven't seen each other. They're brothers. They're the only, for each other, they're the only full brothers. They both come from Rachel, and they both come from Yaakov.
Was Binyamin old enough to know that his brothers sold him, or it was also hidden from him?
I don't know if he knew or not, but he wasn't a part of it. But here, Binyamin now, right, has the opportunity to meet Yosef, so you can see that that if they were crying, the reason they're crying is because they're happy to see each other, right? But that's not what the commentaries say. They're crying because they feel pain that the other one is going to have a loss. Each one of them will have a loss. So why is this? Like, why does the Torah tell us this, and why isn't it just enough that they just feel happy to see each other? So here the commentaries tell us is that when we think about the temple, why was the temple destroyed? Because of hatred, right? Jews hating each other. And why was Yosef sold down to Egypt? Because of hatred, because the brothers hated him. So Yosef goes through this whole ploy to see if his brothers have changed. And we see that it appears that they have. They're ready to go fight to the death to get their other brother back, which means that they've repented for what they did wrong before with Yosef. So on that basis, where they've now done this, right? So now we can see that if the temple was destroyed because of senseless hatred, and the brothers no longer had the senseless hatred, and Yosef feels the pain of Binyamin, and Binyamin feels the pain of Yosef for losing the Beis HaMikdash in the future, so then it's perfectly logical that they'd cry over this now. In other words, what caused the temple to be destroyed? The temple was destroyed because of fighting, right? Jews not getting along with each other. So what do they do here? You have occasion where the Jews do get along with each other. And therefore, he says, you see, we can fix this. So therefore, I cry over what you lost because Jews weren't getting along with each other, and you'll cry over what I lost. But they temper it by doing that. So they're affecting prophecy by doing this. All right, so then it says that everybody in Pharaoh's house, his palace, heard about Yosef being Yosef. Right, if you look in verse 16, Joseph's brothers have come, they said, and it was pleasing in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of the servants. Pharaoh says to Joseph, say to your brothers, all right, load up your animals and go back to the land of Canaan and bring your father and everyone back with you. Right, so it says that so he does. He takes Pharaoh's wagons, he takes Pharaoh's things with Pharaoh's permission, and he sends them up to his father as gifts and as signs. Now, why? Pharaoh tells him he should do it. He wants to show Yosef's father how great Yosef is. Yosef's become the most powerful man in the world, really. I mean, he's second to Pharaoh, but he's running the country. Right? He's really made the country. So by Yosef doing that, and that happening here, so we see clearly that Yosef is playing a very significant role, right? A very important role, and in his doing so, right? He understands that his brothers have repented for what they've done, and now, as it goes along, we're going to find more and more that he's going to become to terms with them, and they're going to have peace. So that's really the basis of it, of what we have seeing here. Now, when Joseph is told to go and takes all the wagons and all the food and all the stuff to go to see his father, right? That's what he's doing. Go get his father and bring him back. So it says that he sent a sign. What was the sign that he sent? Because as far as Yaakov knows, Yosef's dead. He's been dead for years. So what are you telling me that Yosef's alive? He's dead. So Yosef said, it's not enough that my brothers go back and say that I'm alive, because they also said I was dead. So the father says, how am I supposed to know which one to believe? That he died or that he's alive? So Yosef sent a sign, like a code, to his father that he knew his father would know, but that they would not necessarily know, in order for him to be able to tell him. It's sort of like, sometimes I'll have to send money to my daughter, and I have to put a little password in, and I have to ask a question, what's your, whatever you want to say, what's your favorite breakfast cereal? And I write down what it is, and then she answers with the same word, and she can get the money, right? It's like a password, right, kind of thing. So Yosef has to do something like that with his father. So what does he do? It says, by virtue of the fact that he sent the wagons, specifically wagons, that reminded his father of something that they had learned together. What does it mean? That in Hebrew, a wagon is an agalah. Like even what they call a granny cart, right? That you take if you go to the grocery store, you don't have a car, you have like a little shopping cart that you take with you, right? Right. So those shopping carts that you take with you, right? So those ones. I forgot what I was saying about it.
Agalah.
Yeah, so those are called an agalah. And an agalah, right, so however the word agalah is similar to another word, at least in how it sounds, not how it's spelled, which is an egel. An egel is a calf. And there's a mitzvah in the Torah called the eglah arufa, which is it's called the calf whose neck is broken. And this is the story. This is the mitzvah in the Torah. And it says that if you wake up one day and they find a person, let's say a Jew for our conversation, dead on the highway, right? And clearly he's been violently murdered, and he's on the side of the road, right? So who's responsible? He's in between two cities. Who's responsible? The people from the city he left, or the people of the city that he's going to? Because either way, people should be hosting him, they should be welcoming him, they should be providing security for him, and here they're not doing anything. They let him go by himself on the highway, and he gets killed. So it says that you measure the distance between the two cities, and whichever city is closer is the one that has to bear the responsibility for this. Now what does that mean? It means that the elders of the city have to go before God, and they have to say, we had nothing to do with this. It wasn't our fault, right? Although they do assume responsibility for the fact that nobody accompanied this person. No one took care of him. Like, for instance, why would he be walking on the highway at night? Because nobody gave him a place to stay. He needed a place to sleep that night. Nobody would give it to him. So he said, I better go on to the next city. He goes on the way to the next city at night, and he gets jumped. He gets killed. So that's not very nice. That, right? Jews are supposed to open their homes to people, and they don't do that here, right? In this story. So it says that what do is they do this ritual. They go and they take this young calf, and they break its neck, and they offer it as a sacrifice. And by doing that, that atones for this specific sin, for this problem. And it's called the Egla Arufa, the calf with the broken neck. Right? So it says that Yosef and his father were studying the laws of Egla Arufa right before he went out. Like it says, I remember the story, it says that Yosef's talking to his father, and his father says, your brothers have gone out to Dosan, go out there and find them. Right? So what were they doing when they were together before they went? He tells them to go. They were studying the laws of the Egla Rufa, the Medrash says. So he sends them an Agalah to remind them about an Egla. Right? That way Yosef knows that his father will realize it's really him. However, Agalah and Egla sound similar, but they're not similar. Not the meaning and not the spelling. So, like, why would we think that Yaakov, who was a brilliant man, would catch on? You send a wagon, maybe he's just saying it's a wagon. How do you know? It's talking about what we learned before. Where does it come from? So the commentaries explain that it wasn't really exactly that way. What really happened is that when Yosef was with his father that last time, and he says to him, go find your brothers out in the field, it says that Yaakov accompanied Yosef, right, a certain distance of the way. And Yosef says, you just sent me to go do this errand. You don't have to come with me. You sent me to do it. And he says, no, out of respect, the Jewish way of doing things is that when someone comes to your home, you want them to really feel that you're happy to have them. So when they leave, you accompany them a bit. Like, I don't want you to leave, right? So you let them go, but you go with them a little bit. So it says that Yaakov did that to Yosef. He tells Yosef, go out and see what your brothers are doing. And he accompanies Yosef a bit of the way. And Yosef says to him, what are you accompanying with me for? You sent me on a job. I'll do the job. You don't have to trouble yourself. And he says, no, out of respect, because the law of the Egla Rufa is that a person died in between two cities because no one from that city opened up their home to him. No one in that city took an interest in him. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So we're going to take it, so we're going to do differently. And that's how it works. So here, what it says is that Yaakov accompanies him, and he says, the reason I accompany you is because if I didn't accompany you, you could have the problem of the Egla Rufa, the problem where you're going to go out in the wind, you're going to get killed, right? And we're going to have to offer the sacrifice. So he said, right? So it actually applied to their case. So then if that's the case, so then when Yosef sends back the wagons, there's a good chance that Yaakov will think of it, because it wasn't just that Yaakov was learning with him, and he sends him the wagons and says this is tied into the learning we did 25 years ago, because it's not significant enough. He says, no, we learned about the Egla Rufa, and you accompanied me. You went with me because of it. He said, so I'm reminding you that that's what we were studying and we were doing. So that way you know it's really me. So that's really what happens. And so he's able to tell really that it is him. We have on 257 and 259, it tells us that Yaakov has now gathered together everybody in his tribe, and they're going to go to Egypt. So it says Israel set out with all that he had. Now remember, Yisrael and Yaakov are the same person. His name is interchangeable. In most cases, you will find that the Torah uses the name Yisrael when it's referring to him as the father of the Jewish people. Right? He is the leader of the Jewish people. Right? More so than, let's say, Avram or Yitzchak, because each of them had children who went different ways. Right? Yishmael became the father of the Arabs, the Ishmaelim, and in each of the cases, so they went. So in the case of him, they went up and they became like enemies of it. So Yaakov is about to go down now. So he goes down, and God tells him not to worry, because you have to leave Israel. So that's what he says. So here the name Israel is used because he's the founder of the Jewish people. He's going down to Egypt because the Jews, we learned from Abraham, were required to go and be slaves in Egypt. So he's not acting here as the father of 12 sons. He's acting here as the head of the Jewish people. So the name referred to is Israel. And he went out, he went to Beersheba where he offered sacrifices, and he spoke to God, right? And God spoke to him, and God calls out to him, and he answers, I'm the God of your father, don't be afraid, right? You go down to Egypt, everything will be fine, and Joseph shall place his hands on your eyes. That is, Joseph will take your place because you will eventually die in Egypt. And of course what you do is when you find someone has passed away, you close their eyes. And it's a Jewish custom to do so, that a person should not be laying there with their eyes open. So that's what he's referring to here, that Yosef will place his hands on your eyes. So then it talks about how Jacob went, what he did to get down there to Egypt, and then what happens when he gets there, right? And right, so here Yaakov goes down and he tells Yosef, now I can die after my having seen your face because you're still alive. And Joseph says to his brothers, I'll go up and tell Pharaoh that you've come to me. So here Yosef now is going to set up a meeting of the two kings, a meeting between Pharaoh, who is the most powerful, physically most powerful man in the world. His country is the most advanced country. It has conquered all the other countries, and he is the head of it. On the other hand, you have Yaakov, who is the founder of the Jewish nation, right? And he's the head of that. And you're going to have the two of them meet, Pharaoh and Yaakov. And this is an extraordinary meeting. If you look starting at the bottom of the page, it says, then Joseph brought Jacob his father and presented him to Pharaoh. So now he's no longer Yisrael, now he's Jacob. Why? Because Pharaoh wants to meet Joseph's father. What kind of a man has a child who's so amazing? So he wants to meet his father. He doesn't want to meet the head of the Jews. So he brings Jacob, his father, and presents him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blesses Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? This is the first really odd thing. Here you imagine these two kings. Yaakov is an extraordinary figure, right? And Pharaoh is clearly the king of the most powerful nation in the world. So they're going to meet each other. So what does a king say to a king? Well, this king says, how old are you? You look old. That's what he's saying. He says, how many are the days of the years of your life? And he says, Yaakov, you look like an old man. I mean, really old. Right? How old are you? Because Yaakov at that point had gone through some very difficult things. He loses his son, he almost loses his other son, his wife dies young, his father-in-law switches wives on him. All these things happen to him. He's got a pretty tough life. So it shows up on his face. So the Egyptian says to him, like, what's with you? Look at you. You look terrible. All right, so Jacob answers Pharaoh, the days and the years of my sojourns have been 130. Few and bad have been the days of the years of my life, and I have not even reached the lifespans of my forefathers. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and left Pharaoh's presence. Right. So what's going on here is that Pharaoh, right, is meeting Yaakov. And you'd think there'd be a very diplomatic conversation between these two great leaders. Instead, Pharaoh is so shocked by how Yaakov looks, because he looks so old. He says to him, like, whoa, you look really old, right? They make such a statement like that, that he looks way older than he should be. Right? So he says, so Yaakov answers him, hey, I've had a tough life. And this is what goes on. The Medrash says the following. It says that Yaakov says to Pharaoh, I've had a tough life. I had Esau trying to kill me, right? He wanted to kill me. I had Dinah, my daughter, kidnapped and raped by non-Jews. I had my son Yosef, who's my favorite, taken away from me for all these decades. I have my son Binyamin, who's the youngest, the only one left from my wife who died. I'm going to work with. So you have all of these examples, right, of very difficult things that happened to him. And Yaakov is saying, right, I look this way because I've had a hard life. That's why. I've had a hard life. And because of this, the Talmud says that he's punished. Because the idea for a person of his stature to say that he had a hard life means he doesn't understand what's going on. God does these things to you in order for you to grow, that you should be able to succeed. God will not give you a test that you cannot pass. And therefore, on that basis, right, where he's doing this and he's being tested in this way, Yaakov, right, is failing, because he's telling Pharaoh, I've had a terrible life. That's not how the head of the Jewish people should talk. Thank God gave me life. Thank God saved me from Esau. Thank God I don't have to deal with that. Thank God he brought my son Yosef back to me. But instead he's talking about how bad his life is. So the Talmud says a very interesting thing. It says that, not the Talmud, the Medrash, that for every word that Yaakov says about his condition, he loses a year of his life. That God punishes him for that. And that his doing this is not a right thing. But not only for everything he says, but it goes back, if you count the words, it has to go back to Pharaoh asking the question. So you say, well, why should he be punished for Pharaoh asking the question? And the reason that he's punished for it is because he looked so bad. He looked so old. He looked so depressed that even Pharaoh had to ask him, right? You can imagine Pharaoh doesn't care about anybody. He can kill you as much as look at you. If you walk into his place and you got a nice watch, you either give him the watch or he'll cut your arm off and take the watch. But he can do whatever he wants and no one can do anything to him. Right? So he's this amazingly powerful guy. Now he's meeting Yaakov, who in his world is powerful, right? But nothing compared to Pharaoh. That's how Pharaoh sees it, right? And now he's got to go through all of this, right? So that whole idea is, right, an anathema to Pharaoh. He doesn't want to do that, and so therefore you see here what's going on in this discussion, right? You have on the one hand Yaakov, who is the head of the Jews, is telling him openly, I had a tough life. Right, God really set me up for a tough life, and he's saying no such thing as a tough life. Right, everybody has their problems. So, but everybody who has their problems can fix them. Right, that's what he's saying. That's Pharaoh talking to Joseph. Right, and then he goes through this whole story, telling Pharaoh about why they all came and the famine in Israel and so forth. Did you want to say something more?
I did, and I'm sort of related in some way to events that happen. Some people have such bad luck. Everything goes wrong. This goes wrong, and then they have a death, and then they have another. They lose their money, and it's like they're continually being punished. And on top of it all, another thing, because they're upset about what happens, and they complain about it, and they talk about it. Again, something bad happens, and you can relate to what happens even in current circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they keep getting hit at the whole
Well, there's
time.
a very important concept in the book of Bereshis, which we talked about a while ago, but it's worth repeating, which is called Ma'aseh Avot Siman Levanim. The actions of our forefathers are a road sign for the children. That whatever the forefathers did is telling us something is going to happen to us, and this is what we should do. Right? So it says that, for instance, that whenever, like when Yaakov would build Yitzchak or Avram would dig wells, it was always for the future, for the other people, right? So, and we should do the same thing. Right? Today they call it paying it forward, but that's what it is, right? You see that people do that, right? You have all kinds. He said Abraham was given the land of Israel, so what does he do? He walks around the whole land. Well, what a crazy thing to do. You're going to here you're this great guy, Abraham. You got nothing to do but walk around a country, the whole country, step on everywhere. And the answer is yes, because I'm acquiring the country through an action by my walking on it. It's mine. God promised it to me. He gave it to me. It's mine now. I'm walking on it. I'm the owner, and that is for us, so that when we come there, it's our land also. That's why it was such a big deal that Abraham had to buy a field from a man whose and it was his land anyways. He owned the country. right? So that just shows us a bit. So this concept of the actions of the forefathers have an effect on the children is Yosef and Yaakov are using the same thing. They're doing things with an eye to the future for us.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Now, Pharaoh was asking Yaakov these questions. Now, in our modern time, there's something called talk therapy. Like, if someone's talking about their issues and they're negative, but they need to talk about them in order to get better, is that going to negatively impact them?
No, but he wasn't doing it in order to get better.
Oh, okay.
He's talking.
Complaining.
I mean, it's like here you have the head of the Hebrews talking to the head of the Egyptians, who is it's like having, like Prime Minister of Canada go to talk to the President of the United States, and he tells them, oh, my life's been terrible. I'm having a terrible life. That's not what you do. You go to the Prime Minister, goes to the President, and you have a conversation that builds you up and builds him up and keeps your relationship strong. Now, what does Yaakov want? Pity from Pharaoh? He wants him to feel bad for him? It says Yaakov, the reason Pharaoh asks him the question, it's so weird that he asked the question. That's part of the problem. That if I was Pharaoh and I'm meeting another great leader, the father of Yosef, Yosef saved my country. His father is a diplomat. I'm going to meet him. And I come in the room, I open the door, and there he is, and I say, my God, how old are you? Right? That's what he says. I mean, he looks so old. Right? So that Pharaoh is like flabbergasted. That's not what he should say. He should come in and say, on behalf of the Egyptian people, I'm very glad to meet you. And the father of my number 2 man in my whole country. He's such an extraordinary son. You must get a lot of pleasure from him. It must mean a lot to you what he's accomplished in the world. But no, he just looks at the guy and he says, how old are you? Because he looked so old. And the reason he looked old is not because he was old. Is because in his mind he had a terrible life. His life was full of trouble. He marries the wrong woman. His wife dies young. His son Yosef is taken from him. Esau tries to kill him. Right? All of these things are going on in his life. He's having a tough time. Dinah gets raped. His daughter gets raped. Terrible life. Any one of these things happen, God forbid, to anyone that we know, and that they'd be a wreck. And he was a wreck. But God punishes him for this. He says because
I'm 130 years young.
Yeah, by him saying this, it's a complaint against God. So God says God shortened his life because of this. He didn't live as long because he went and because he did this. He shouldn't. And it wasn't just because of what he said that he's punished. It's also because of how he looked. He allowed himself to become a broken person because of what God had done. When in reality, this should have been the opposite. God's involvement in his life was such that it was a big positive, and he sees it as a negative. Right? So he goes through this whole story here about why they came down, how Yosef got there, right? And then it gives us the whole story of how Yosef is able to change the society that they're in. How does he do that? It works like this. First, this was Yosef's plan. Right? Like, what was so great about his plan? He goes down there and he sees from Pharaoh that Pharaoh has a dream that he's going to have a famine for 7 years. So he says, what I'm going to do now is in the next couple of years that are come, we're going to have extra food, we're going to store it away, and we're going to use it during the 7 years. Not only will we use it, but we'll have enough to sell so that we can raise the price and people from all over the world will come buy it. Why? Because you need food. It makes no difference how much you charge. You have to have that food. So you're going to pay whatever you got to pay. So, right? So he would go and provide food, get food for him, right? Because you had whatever it took to get the food, you'd have to get it because it was a famine. So what does he do? Yosef says, okay, so we're going to save all the leftover food. Right? And then we've got a lot now. At the end of 7 years, we know that there were 7 good years, so we had lots of food left over. Now we have 7 bad years. We're going to use that food. Nobody else did. Everyone else says 7 good years, there'll be 8 good years. But he knew there wouldn't be, so they started saving it. So everyone from the world had to come to them to buy food. They had to pay a higher price because they're the only ones who have it. Right? Eventually, the Egyptians themselves go to Pharaoh and they say, we don't have any money to live. Right? There's a famine going on in the world, and yes, we have stuff right? But it's yours. All the stuff that we've saved from the previous years belongs to the Pharaoh. It doesn't belong to them. So they would go to Pharaoh, the Egyptians themselves, and say, we need food. So it says that Yosef told Pharaoh, the first thing you do when they come to you is buy their farms. They all have farms, buy them. And then they'll be shareholders. Right? In other words, that you go and you buy their farm. They'll work for you on your farm rather than before they're working on their farm. And you will pay them a stipend. So you'll give them money to buy their farm. Now they've got some money, they pay off their debts. And that now the farm is owned by Pharaoh. So you're a sharecropper. You're going to work, but you're going to get a portion. Right? But you'll always get your portion. Right? So that's what he did. Then it says that at a certain point came where they couldn't make ends meet, even with that. So then Yosef tells Pharaoh, okay, now they have nothing to sell you. They have to sell themselves. Now we are changing society. Up until now, it was a free society, which meant Pharaoh could do whatever he wanted, but everybody else was a citizen. You had rights. So Pharaoh Yosef says, that's not how it's going to stay. We're going to switch from being a very common form of government. We're going to become a real dictatorship. The people are going to come to you for food, and they have nothing to sell you. You tell them they have to sell themselves to you. They're going to become your slaves. You own the people. So this is not as radical as you might think, because it's how it was in the history of the world. Under kings, the kings owned the country. The treasury of the government was their personal bank account. People could be born or die at their whim because they're in charge. It made no difference. The king can kill whoever he wanted. You can't prosecute him. Right? He's the most powerful man. That's the whole thing about being king. So this is this whole idea of him being like this, where he's Pharaoh is the king. He's all powerful. He has all of these things that he does, right? And it comes all from Yosef. Yosef finally tells them, sell yourselves, and Pharaoh will take care. So they do. Now they're no longer citizens. They're now servants. Right? They have no civil rights anymore. They are now servants of Pharaoh. So now Pharaoh has taken over the whole country. That's what he wanted to do. And here, in a bloodless coup, you see that Yosef stages it so that he gets what he wants. So this is why Pharaoh loved Joseph, because he took care of everything. People got their food, and he became even richer and richer and richer until it got to the point that he owned it. Now, like I said, before the French Revolution, the King of France owned the people of France. The treasury of France was his personal account. Nobody would go and do an audit on his account and see what he's using money for. It's his money. You pay taxes, it's his money. Whatever he wants to give to run the country, that's up to him, but it's his money. That's what it changed to. And it became such a thing. And that this story is what this story is telling us about the significance of this idea of the differences between how the Jews look at things, how the non-Jews did. So then you see it towards the end, the last few lines, like in verse 26, it says, 25. So he says, and they said, these are the people of Egypt, you have saved our lives, because we were starving to death. May we find favor in your eyes, my Lord, and we will be serfs to Pharaoh. So here you see the Egyptians selling themselves to Pharaoh. So then it says, so Joseph imposed it as a statute till this day regarding the land of Egypt. It was Pharaoh's for the fifth. Only the priest's land alone did not become Pharaoh's. Pharaoh now owned the entire country. The only thing he didn't own was the land of Goshen. And that's because in the land of Goshen, which is sort of like a county, let's say, within Egypt, the whole idea was that they had that county, that one county was different than the others because he allowed the religious leaders to live there. Pharaoh was very similar that way to the Canadian government, which was he might not believe in religion, but he knew enough not to start up with it. And therefore, even though there was one religion or the other religion, he wouldn't start up with it. He would allow them to do whatever they needed to do. So therefore it says that he had this city, right? But the priest's land alone did not become Pharaoh's. So the land where the priests lived in Egypt and where eventually Jews would live did not become part of Pharaoh's land. He left that unacquired. That was still the way it used to be. And that's right. That's really how he sees it. So here you see what Yosef did is he applied pretty much modern forms of building an economy to Egypt, and it worked. And we can learn from this how we should do things. Right? It's the same idea, right? That you go and you take shares of things and you sell things in a different way, because ultimately Pharaoh, who was in charge, now has forever. He has the power to do anything he wants. He owns all the land. He owns all the people, right? On the one hand, he owned all the land, all the people beforehand also. He just didn't have a contract on it. Now he has a contract, right? Because it's always that way. The king owns the people. The king owns the money. It's his, right? But here he actually bought it. So it says that, so Joseph imposed it as a statute till this day regarding the land of Egypt. It was Pharaoh's for the fifth. Only the priest's land alone did not become Pharaoh's. Like we said, thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property in it, and they were fruitful and multiplied greatly. So here the Jews go and they live in a Jewish neighborhood. He tells them, Yosef wants all his brothers to live together in an area where most people did not live, in the land of Goshen. So he sends them to live there so that they shouldn't be intermingled and assimilate. And they did go and live there. And then it says that the people went to live there and they acquired property and they were fruitful and multiplied. So they were successful in business. The Jews come and they start taking over. And then when we get to the book of Shmos, we see Pharaoh say, we can't trust these Jews. We're going to have a war. They're going to side with our enemy, throw us out, and they're going to take over. Right? We can't allow this to happen. Therefore, they've made slaves out of the Jews. Right? In his mind, that was the reason why. Because he didn't want them, he didn't want it to be around. All right, so here we have the Jews living in Goshen, and it says that they acquired property. It means they were successful in business, and they were fruitful and multiplied. So there were many Jews. So if you look, like I said, in the next coming parshas, there's real anti-Semitism, where Pharaoh says, I want to make the Jews slaves, kill off their children. I want to make the Jews slaves. Right? Nobody fought with them. This is supposed to be like a modern society. Nobody fought with them. They said, okay. Why? Because Pharaoh ultimately saw the Jews as a threat. He says that we're going to have a war. The Jews are going to side with our enemy, throw us out, and take over the country. So we don't want the Jews to come here. We don't want them to have the power. We'll starve them to death. And that's why they did what they did. Right? And ultimately, they had to stop. It says that they acquired property in it, and they were fruitful, and they multiplied. So, and the Gemara says, what does it mean, fruitful and multiplied here? In most cases, it just means that you had children, right? According to the letter of the law, it means you had one son and one daughter, which, of course, we don't have control over. But in order to fulfill that mitzvah, that's what one would do. You have one son and one daughter. But here it says that the Jews not only were fruitful and multiplied, but they did it greatly. So there, it explains in the Haggadah and also in the Torah that Jewish women were blessed to have multiple births because they wanted to bulk up the nation. There should be a lot of people. Then we went down, there were only 70 people went down to Egypt. Right now they've got to become a whole nation, right? And before God lets them out. So the women, it says, used to give birth to sex triplets. Some people say even 60 kids. Now, of course, I think that might be a bit difficult. But 6 kids is not simple, but it's possible. So here we see and that's what they did. When it says fruitful and multiply, it means beyond the norm in order to fill the land. And we see that it happens because there's basically 3 million people come out of Egypt. Right? Only 70 entered Egypt. Right? It was 240 years before. So if you do it mathematically, you find that people had to have 6 or 7 children at least in order for that to happen. So that's where the Medrash takes it from.
So, Rabbi, was the lowering of the Egyptian people into serfs from independent farmers, was that a necessary precondition for the Exodus in some way?
No. It was Yosef acting in the best possible way for his boss.
Okay.
Right? It's not forbidden. But and therefore he was allowed to do it. But it was only done for political reasons. Okay. It wasn't that he believed that God wanted this. He believed that this is how I'm going to accomplish Pharaoh's goal. Pharaoh has to be the most powerful man in the world, either because Yosef wants him to be, because he works for him, or because he understood, excuse me, that a person like Pharaoh, who becomes very, very successful, becomes arrogant, and he's going to go to war with us when we're taken out of Egypt. And I want him to feel that he can fight us. Right? That was part of it also. Right, so that's really the basis. But what we've done now is at this point, the Jewish people have moved to Egypt, all 70 of them. Right? It'll be a couple of weeks before it actually says that, but they've now come down to Egypt, and at the invitation of Pharaoh, who's in love with Yosef. It doesn't take long, of course, that they forget him. And in a couple of weeks, you'll see it says that there was a Pharaoh in Egypt who did not know Yosef, and then suddenly the Jews become slaves. And because the world very often forgets when you do good things. My Rosh Yeshiva used to say, I never did a favor for him. I don't know what he's upset about. The opposite of what you think. Because when you do a good deed for someone, very often it comes back to bite you. So here Yosef goes out of his way to set up the economy so Pharaoh becomes the most powerful man in the world. Now he's so powerful, he's going to take the Jews, including Yosef, and make them into slaves. Right? It's not a very good payment for what he did, but it's understandable for who he was. And that's what he wanted to accomplish. So that's really that's where we stand. So next week will be the end of Yaakov's life, and he gathers everyone together in Egypt, all of his sons, to give them blessings. They follow that, and then we begin the book of Shmos, where the Jews are now, the whole story is about the Jewish nation. They've grown, and what is it like living in Egypt as slaves with anti-Semitism. This is probably one of the first serious cases of anti-Semitism in history, and it doesn't go away, right? It's always there, but this is one serious case, and Hashem intervenes, right? But that's really it. All right, so we'll conclude with that now.